not know what happened with the sound last week. That was just really, really, really weird. I'm going to try to be very careful so that it doesn't happen again this week. I think it was an issue with my internet more than anything else. But today we're going to have a couple things that we need to talk about. One is I want to talk about how to get credit for assignments, resubmissions, and stuff like that. We'll talk about that really briefly. But I also want to talk about the nature of art and how we come to find meaning in art. And this directly relates to the four um, tools of artistic critique that we've talked about. I would like to look at what people have turned in regarding their houses and the photos. I think some of them are really, really well done. And then we're going to talk about this next assignment. And I hope people notice that I extended the dates. Um, when I transfer a course over into the new semester, it does a pretty good job sometimes at translating all the due dates, but not always. And if you guys feel that things are a little bit too crowded together, let me know and I will make the changes. Again, I wanted to remind people that the due dates are primarily there to just help you remember to keep going on the course. As you know, everything is pretty flexible. I want people to have a terrific experience. I want people to have to do what they need to get the course accomplished. And I really don't, even though my syllabus says otherwise, I don't take off points for things being turned in late, as long as people let me know what's going on. I have absolutely no problem extending deadlines. All right, so if that sounds good to you guys, even if it doesn't, we'll go ahead and do it. um, one thing I noticed, and I wanted to make sure that everybody understood this pretty well. There are a couple kits left that people still need to pick up. Please get those as quickly as you possibly can. This next project requires you to use wire, and that wire is in the kit. So you will need it. You can supplement that with your own wire and use other things as well. But it's when you register for this class, part of the fee, or actually the entire fee, goes to that kit for that kit. So please go and get your kit. If you have any problems picking it up or difficulty accessing the building, you or your agent picking it up for you, please let me know, and we'll figure out whatever we need to get the kit to you. But like I said, I think everybody but one or two people have gotten the kits. So please pick that up as soon as you can. Another thing I wanted to mention was that if assignments haven't been turned in after a couple days, or sometimes, for attendance, it's pretty much the next day. After the due date, I will start putting zeros in. But what that is intended is for, it triggers Canvas to remind you that you've missed an assignment, and it's just to help you to remember that you've got to turn that in. I believe I emailed everybody about this. I did have a student who was the primary caregiver for his parents who were struck down with COVID. And so the family life was pretty stressful. And he just hadn't turned anything in, and he was getting a D- because of it. So he told me what the situation was, and I just told him, don't give up. Just turn the stuff in that you've finished. And he thought that it was too late. And I explained, no, it's not, because this is an online class. Because how I run things, I'm very happy to be flexible. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, he was able to turn in the stuff that he had not submitted, that he had already had done, and his grade went from a D- to an A- in less than 3 weeks. So be mindful of that. And again, if you see a zero, it's not because you've missed the opportunity to get any points for it. It's just to trigger Canvas letting you know and reminding you that you have an assignment that you need to get submitted. Also, when you resubmit things, Canvas will overwrite every previous submission for that assignment. So keep that in mind. When you do a quiz, you'll have to redo the whole quiz. Um, and that can be an issue if you don't take screenshots or take images of each of the questions that you got right. And if there's something where I ask you to email me after you resubmit, like for discussions, the uh, Canvas is not really good about letting me know when people submit um, supplements to discussions. When I say email me, you need to actually email me, because putting it into the discussion or putting it in as an assignment comment, the message will not get to me. And so either email me through the Canvas email that I send everybody emails every week on, or email me directly to my campus email, and that email address is in the syllabus. And I have seen several people this last week have redone their quizzes and got perfect scores. There's no reason that you can't get perfect scores on all your quizzes. Even if that means you retake them 2 or 3 times, doesn't matter. Everybody can get perfect scores. All right, do either of you have questions on any of that stuff that I just talked about?
I do not. Thank you.
All right.
No, you answered everything pretty well.
All right, super. Okay, what we are going to do next is we have 3 videos to watch. If sometimes YouTube lets these go through and they stay in our class video, sometimes YouTube tells me there's a copyright issue and I have to edit them out. If you don't see them, I will have them in the attendance assignment. I will have these 3 videos. And for your attendance points this week, you'll need to watch our class video. And if these other videos are edited out, and there's like 2.5 minutes, 4 minutes, and 4.5 minutes, you'll need to watch those and include at least 1 or 2 things that you pick up from those videos as well. So we're going to watch 1 video about Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and we're going to watch 2 videos about the meaning of art, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. Now, Andy or Nicole, are either of you familiar with Plato's Allegory of the Cave?
I am not.
Okay.
I am not either. It rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
Okay. I know it may come as a shock, but I do not have a lot of social skills. And so growing up, I did a lot of reading. And some of my favorite stuff reading were, believe it or not, going into the elementary school library and checking out things that by Plato and other guys like that. That's the kind of stuff I would read, just because I thought it was interesting. And in his books that he wrote, Plato, he's the one who came up with the idea of Atlantis that we're so familiar with. He talks about a lot of different things. The world of the ideal is something that we'll touch on when we talk about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. But I loved this allegory that he talks about, because it really kind of gives us a platform to understand a little bit about the potential role that the artist can have in society. And I want to talk a little bit about Wassily Kandinsky afterwards as well. He wrote a book called Spirituality and Art that is really an excellent, it's a short book. It's a really, really good one to read. But I want to go ahead, we'll watch Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to do a screen share here. Alrighty. All right, Nicole and Andy, can you hear that okay? I just started it and there was a little bit of music. Okay, good. All right.
What is reality? Knowledge. The meaning of life. Big topics you might tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down a road, or across an ocean, a climb, a war, a book, a thread, a game, a window of opportunity, or an all too short-lived flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said life is like being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows flitting across a stone wall. Pretty cheery, right? That's actually what Plato suggested in his Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society by examining concepts like justice, truth, and beauty. In the allegory, a group of prisoners have been confined in a cavern since birth, with no knowledge of the outside world. They are chained facing a wall, unable to turn their heads, while a fire behind them gives off a faint light. Occasionally, people pass by the fire, carrying figures of animals and other objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners name and classify these illusions, believing they're perceiving actual entities. Suddenly, one prisoner is freed and brought outside for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appear much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and finally at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. The prisoner returns to the cave to share his discovery, but he is no longer used to the darkness and has a hard time seeing the shadows on the wall. The other prisoners think the journey has made him stupid and blind and violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. In fact, the real-life Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order, and his student Plato spends much of the Republic disparaging Athenian democracy, while promoting rule by philosopher kings. With the cave parable, Plato may be arguing that the masses are too stubborn and ignorant to govern themselves. But the allegory has captured imaginations for 2,400 years because it can be read in far more ways. Importantly, the allegory is connected to the theory of forms developed in Plato's other dialogues, which holds that, like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are flawed reflections of ideal forms, such as roundness or beauty. In this way, the cave leads to many fundamental questions, including the origin of knowledge, the problem of representation, and the nature of reality itself. For theologians, the ideal forms exist in the mind of a creator. For philosophers of language viewing the forms as linguistic concepts, the theory illustrates the problem of grouping concrete things under abstract terms. And others still wonder whether we can really know that the things outside the cave are any more real than the shadows. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? Perhaps one day a glimmer of light may punch a hole in your most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, even if it costs you your friends and family? Or stick with comfortable and familiar illusions? Truth or habit? Light or shadow? Hard choices. But if it's any consolation, you're not alone. There are lots of us down here.
What did you guys think about that?
I thought it was really interesting on how the three guys are in the cave and what they've known all their lives has to be reality, but once they step into the real world, they don't they're like newborn babies basically because they have to relearn what they want. They have to relearn what's actually true, and once they finally understand it, some some other people refuse to believe that because they don't think it's true. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think that that's a pretty good summation. It's interesting to me because there are all sorts of different ideas that this kind of helps us recall. One is, like you just said, what is the nature of reality? And I think on one level, the allegory seems to be pretty clear. Perhaps we're living in a world that is represented by those shadows on the wall, and we can get to a point of mental or spiritual transcendence to see that the things that we interact with every day are related to their real forms in the same way that a shadow is related to whatever casts the shadow. And I think that is really fascinating to me. And this ties in with what I was talking about Wassily Kandinsky at the beginning. In his book, Spirituality and Art, one of the things he talks about is that the artist has a responsibility of being something of a prophet, whether or not they want to be. Because an artist is in a particular situation where they can see things beyond their immediate environment, or they can start piercing what Plato referred to as that kind of realm of shadow. And their responsibility is to come back and kind of share with other people what they're seeing. And whether or not you want to accept that responsibility, the fact that you've dedicated your life to creative construction means that you kind of have some of that responsibility, whether or not you want it. And what is interesting to me, though, is that the artists that really claim that responsibility are usually people that are just very, very difficult to be around. And I think it's the artists that just kind of put their heads down and work and share what they're creating will kind of demonstrate that additional perception without being so egotistical that they feel the need to tell people that they're sharing it. Do you know what I mean? You know, I look at artists like Kara Walker, who deals with incredibly difficult, painful things, and Nick Cave doing the same kind of stuff, but they never tell people, I am dealing with really difficult, painful things. They just do what they feel compelled to do. And I love that aspect of a good artist. But the other thing that's interesting to me is, and we'll touch on it again. We'll watch this again towards the end of the term when we talk about conceptual art. The other thing that I think is really interesting is it starts putting a seed of a question in our minds. Where is reality based? What is true reality? And I think that's a question that I think is good to have. And it's a question that I doubt there is ever going to be a solid answer to, at least a solid answer that we can understand as temporal beings. Reality, I'm gonna kind of sidestep a little bit, and you guys will probably think I'm weird, but that ship has sailed. I am a folklorist as well. In fact, I'm doing a presentation with a couple friends on Bigfoot and the history of Bigfoot in Utah County, believe it or not, on the 13th in June at the Provo Library, if you guys would like to come. It's going to be at 6 o'clock at night, and it's completely free. But the reason I love folklore is it represents this kind of realm where people are trying to process reality through telling stories about it. And whether or not you believe that things like ghosts and monsters are actually real in a concrete sense, the fact is when somebody has encountered something like this, their body goes through all the physiological changes as if the thing is physically present before them, whether or not it's a figment of their imagination or misunderstood input. It doesn't matter. The body can't tell the difference. And because the body can't tell the difference, the brain and the mind, by remembering what the body goes through, catalogs it as something that it can't tell the difference either. So even though we may experience something that at its base is a fundamental misunderstanding of a stimulus, since our body reacts as if it's a real threat or a real experience, our brain, in remembering that event, also remembers how our body reacts and chooses to remember. Our brain is doing this. The brain chooses to remember it as a real event. So for every practical intent to the individual, it is an absolutely real thing, whether or not to the outside world it's replicatable or something that could be experienced by anybody else. So which is, I think is really interesting. When you guys create your art, how many times do you remember coming to when and it dawns on you that 4 hours has passed and your feet are asleep, or you've been doing the same thing for quite a long time, and it dawns on you that people were talking to you that you never, and it never registered and you didn't respond to them? How many of you guys have had that experience? Oh, hey, Kelly. Nicole, you have?
Oh yeah, there are lots of
Andy?
projects that sort of thing happens a lot.
Could you share like the weirdest one that happened to you?
I can. I was working on an art project and I was just sitting at my desk doing it, and then I started like in the morning, and then next thing I know, it's dinner time and my family's telling me that it's time to eat. And I didn't realize because I was just sitting there doing art.
And it was just, you were completely removed from the shared world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, I'm laughing because that is so wild to me, and it does happen. I want to say Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if that's the right person, but he called it being in the state of flow. Have you guys have heard of Albert Dürer, haven't you? If you guys do not know who Albrecht Dürer is, and that's Albrecht, and his last name is Duhrer. He is quite possibly the finest dry point etcher of the Baroque period. But he wrote quite a bit about art and what art actually means. And I came across an essay, and just to demonstrate the level of social inadequacy that I possess and my supreme nerdiness, I read his essay both in German and in the English translation just to see if there were any differences. And I only say that to validate my supreme nerdiness. But he talks about different pillars that establish what art is. One pillar is correct materials. You using materials that fit best with the project and intent. Like, for example, if you are building an exterior monument, you would build it with something that lasts in the outside elements. If you are building something that is intended to be cast into metal, you would probably make it out of clay, or out of wax, so that the wax could be melted out and the metal could replace it in a casting. Another thing that he talks about is correct proportion. Being aware as you build something that things need to be balanced in order to evoke the particular response you're looking for and to communicate what you're hoping to communicate. A third one is honesty and craftsmanship, where you build it the way it needs to be done, to the best of your ability. And regardless of the reality that our abilities change from project to project and moving forward, we always get better. Whether or not we see that ourselves, we do always get better. He talked about building it not so that will be absolutely ideal for ages to come, but so that it is built to the best of our honest ability at that moment that we're constructing it. So those are three of the pillars. And then the fourth one ties in with what Nicole is talking about. And when Nicole says she experienced it, what Andy is shared, letting a whole day go by while you're involved in your art. And he talks about investing it with breath. And the term he uses is spiritus. And what he describes is during the process of creation, we reach for something outside of our normal, everyday, ego-driven self. And you can identify that with universe, deity, our higher selves, our subconscious mind, or just allowing ourselves to communicate with the art so that the art can speak for itself. It doesn't really matter what that is. It comes down to the spiritus or breath that comes outside of our ordinary ego-driven self. And when that happens, that's when we lose touch with ordinary time. That's when we go through an entire day without realizing that all the daylight hours are gone and suddenly dinner time. Or people have been talking to us trying to get our attention. We completely ignore them. And most recently, that idea has been referred to as getting into a state of flow. And this is something that I think is fascinating because art is not just painting or drawing or any of those typical media that we think of. Art is really any type of activity or the product of any activity where we get into that state of flow, where we address it, where we create beyond or where we create in a state where we are asking for help or using help outside of our normal ego-driven self, where we're communing with our higher order self or our subconscious or anything like that. And which means that art is not limited to media, but it can also include things like teaching kindergartners or growing potatoes or pruning trees. I have a friend who's a professional arborist who had to cut down trees from around a 150-year-old cemetery. And these were lodgepole pines that had been there for like 85 years, so super tall. But he had to do it in such a way so all the trees had to be felled so that they did not touch any of the headstones. And he was able to do it. And regardless of whether or not you think arboring is an art form, what he was able to accomplish in 2 days is definitely art. It almost a kind of dance with the skill that he was demonstrating. But for the purpose of this class, I think we'll when we talk about art, mostly it'll be with the media that we use. But what do you guys think about that idea that when we connect with something that puts us in a state of flow, the activity or the product of that activity becomes art? What do you think about that idea? Is that new to you, or is that something that you disagree with or agree with?
I
I
think
would say I would agree.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I agree because you can do a lot of things that most people don't see as art, but if you're creating something or you're doing something, I would still consider that art. Like as long as you get in that flow and you're making something, I would consider it art.
All right, good. I'm glad there's somebody else that can see the merits of that idea. What were you going to say, Nicole?
Yeah, I agree as well. I think that sort of context gives even more value to a lot of art for me. I remember in one of my classes last semester, I cannot think of his name, but there was a performance artist essentially where he had a piece that was just, I think it was just called 4 Minutes of Silence, where he sits at a piano and does not play anything. And it was a whole discussion on whether or not it was art. But I think that sort of ties into this flow state of the intention that he was putting into it and all of the things that led up to the actual performance are part of the piece. And I think the flow kind of plays in that same way.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good perspective. How about you, Kelly? Any thoughts?
I agree for sure. Can you hear me?
Barely. It is very quiet.
Sorry. Is this any better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree for sure. There are many times I work as a graphic designer at a screen printing shop, and there are so many times where I get so into just what I'm doing that time has gone by and I've like skipped my lunch on accident. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and it, when you get into that state, it almost doesn't matter what you're doing, but you get into that flow state, and at the end, what is fascinating to me is at the end of an experience like that, sometimes we have to tell ourselves it was a waste of time because there's a part of us that really doesn't believe it was a waste of time. And I think that's really fascinating. Yes, thank you, Kelly. Now I'm going to move on. We have one video is 2.5 minutes and the other one is just a little bit over 4 minutes. But I like both of these because they talk about, the short one talks about what is art, and then the longer one talks about how do we talk about art. And I want to watch these really quick, and then we'll talk about them both together at the end. So, you guys ready? All right, give me just a short half an hour while I share my screen. Okay, here we go.
Art. When we hear that word, some of our minds jump to museums or framed paintings. And in that context, some people think, nah, I'm not a big fan of art. I just don't get it. Or they think of art as something that's just for intellectuals or artsy people. But really, art is for anyone who wants to experience it. And it's often in more places than we might realize. Songs you like, movies you watch, poems, theater, even a quilt that your grandmother made. All of that and more is art. So you might be wondering, well, then what is art? How do I define it? Well, that's tough. Art's been around for thousands of years, and through the ages it's evolved in a number of different ways. And the reasons for creating it vary from person to person depending on any number of factors. So defining art is pretty tricky, and it's something that's been debated throughout history. There just isn't one agreed upon definition. However, many believe that art is anything that stirs emotion in you. Now, the emotions that get stirred up depend entirely on your own history, your story, everything that comes together to make up who you are. And because of this, three different people can experience the same piece of art and have wildly different reactions to it. One person might think it's the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, the second person might hate it, and the third might not feel much of anything at all. And none of them would be wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own preferences and feelings when it comes to art. You know, the way you feel about your favorite song could be the same way that someone else feels about their favorite sculpture. And even though you might not like that sculpture, it can be valuable to consider why that person enjoys it so much. You may learn something about them and maybe even yourself. The term art is really just a label. Over the years, a lot of people have tried to classify what it is or what it isn't, but that's not really what art is about. It's about your personal experience with it and the meaning that you draw from it. Everyone reacts to art differently and has the potential to grow and learn from it. It gives us the opportunity to tell stories, record history, and tap into our emotions in a way that few other things can. Goodwill committed.
All righty. Now, before we talk about that, I'm going to switch to the other one. Oh, Emily, great. You made it. Excellent.
Hi.
Hi.
I just got out of work.
Oh, excellent. Okay, now we're going to transition into another one. This is about a little bit over 4 minutes, and this talks about who decides what art means. And then we'll talk briefly about both of those and then go into the next thing to talk about today.
Imagine you and a friend are strolling through an art exhibit and a striking painting catches your eye. The vibrant red appears to you as a symbol of love, but your friend is convinced it's a symbol of war. And where you see stars in a romantic sky, your friend interprets global warming-inducing pollutants. To settle the debate, you turn to the internet, where you read that the painting is a replica of the artist's first-grade art project. Red was her favorite color, and the silver dots are fairies. You now know the exact intentions that led to the creation of this work. Are you wrong to have enjoyed it as something that the artist didn't intend? Do you enjoy it less now that you know the truth? Just how much did the artist's intention affect your interpretation of the painting? It's a question that's been tossed around by philosophers and art critics for decades, with no consensus in sight. In the mid-20th century, literary critic W.K. Wimsatt and philosopher Monroe Beardsley argued that artistic intention was irrelevant. They called this the intentional fallacy, the belief that valuing an artist's intentions was misguided. Their argument was twofold. First, the artists we study are no longer living, never recorded their intentions, or are simply unavailable to answer questions about their work. Second, even if there were a bounty of relevant information, Wimsatt and Beardsley believed they would distract us from the qualities of the work itself. They compared art to a dessert. When you taste the pudding, the chef's intentions don't affect whether you enjoy its flavor or texture. All that matters, they said, is that the pudding works. Of course, what works for one person might not work for another. And since different interpretations appeal to different people, the silver dots in our painting could be reasonably interpreted as fairies, stars, or pollutants. By Wimsatt and Beardsley's logic, the artist's interpretation of her own work would just be one among many equally acceptable possibilities. If you find this problematic, you might be more in line with Stephen Knapp and Walter Ben Michaels, two literary theorists who rejected the intentional fallacy. They argued that an artist's intended meaning was not just one possible interpretation, but the only possible interpretation. For example, suppose you're walking along a beach and come across a series of marks in the sand that spell out a verse of poetry. Knapp and Michaels believed the poem would lose all meaning if you discovered these marks were not the work of a human being, but an odd coincidence produced by the waves. They believed an intentional creator is what makes the poem subject to understanding at all. Other thinkers advocate for a middle ground, suggesting that intention is just one piece in a larger puzzle. Contemporary philosopher Noel Carroll took this stance, arguing that an artist's intentions are relevant to their audience, the same way a speaker's intentions are relevant to the person they're engaging in conversation. To understand how intentions function in conversation, Carroll said to imagine someone holding a cigarette and asking for a match. You respond by handing them a lighter, gathering that their motivation is to light their cigarette. The words they use to ask the question are important, but the intentions behind the question dictate your understanding and ultimately your response. So which end of this spectrum do you lean towards? Do you, like Wimsatt and Beardsley, believe that when it comes to art, the proof should be in the pudding? Or do you think that an artist's plans and motivations for their work affect its meaning? Artistic interpretation is a complex web that will probably never offer a definitive answer. Did you know that TED-Ed has a program dedicated to sharing?
I really like the questions posed by that second video, and I like how the first video kind of talks about what art is, what it potentially can be. I think these can start a lot of conversations, but in my mind, there's something that humans do that very few other animals bother to, and that is humans seem to need to be part of a conversation somehow. They need to be part of a community. And I think art functions as an element of communication, where if it's just one way, it doesn't really seem to fulfill itself as art. And so that leads me to believe that the meaning of art is something that develops and grows as the viewer tries to learn what they themselves think about the art and what the artist perhaps had done, and perhaps even the context that the art was originally created for. I think all those things play a role. And so the real meaning of art is something that varies from individual to individual, but I think it can rest comfortably within an overarching cloud of appreciation. What do you guys think about that? Where do you think that the meaning? Yes, Andy.
So I do agree with you on how I think art is like opinion based. Like the artist can have an intention on their own, but like the viewer is allowed to have their own opinion on art, because humans are like, the reason why we're above the food chain is because we have critical thinking, and we judge and we have opinions of our own. So everyone is allowed to have an an opinion on a piece of art, because to them that makes the art, because they are able to view it in a different way compared to someone else, and that's what makes the art so amazing, because it can bring out so many different opinions.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an awful lot to that. If artwork only has one possible meaning, what would be the point of creating the art? And that's something that I think. Well, let me approach it from a slightly different way. Have any of you had an experience where you encountered like a movie, a book, a piece of music, an artwork that you saw, a video game, anything like that, where your initial response to it was incredibly negative, and then as you grew a little bit personally, you returned to it later and discovered, wow, there's an awful lot to that. And whether or not you enjoyed it, you respected it later on. Have any of you had an experience like that you could share? Okay, Nicole.
Yeah, I think honestly that is why context in art is so valuable for me. Is I feel like I've had that experience a lot where I see something and just don't really get it. I don't really get what they were going for, and then learning about what led to that piece really makes me respect it a lot more. Kind of like the piece I was talking about a little bit ago, the minutes of silence, where seeing the performance was kind of like, okay, this is interesting, I suppose, but whatever. But once I learned a little bit more about why he wanted to do that performance, and it was about how there's never really silence, because those minutes were filled with things in the audience, like people coughing or shushing or rustling or whatever, and it was meant to engage the audience as being part of that performance. So after learning about that, I don't know that I would want to sit through 4 minutes of silence, but I definitely had a lot more, I guess, positive reaction to it after learning about that context.
Let's see. I think it was John Cage was the one that wrote the 4 Minutes of Silence.
Yes, thank you.
And it was something that he said himself that he had spoken with a Buddhist who had a very interesting perspective on music. And the Buddhist told him that the thing that gives us the permission to hear the tones is not necessarily the tone themselves, but is alone, but is just as equally the silence that surrounds the tone. And that the tone becomes something that we listen to because of its difference and separation from the silence, or because of its cradling within the silence. And I thought that's a really fascinating way to think about music. But yeah, and it puts it in a very interesting frame of mind. I believe that it is not at all necessary to understand what a person was thinking who originated something in order to appreciate the art. But I think it can help us to expand our respect of whatever it is. I thank you, Nicole, for sharing that. One of the things that I went through, and I teach this now in the art history classes that I teach. I used to think that color field painting was a massive waste of time. It was draining as a resource, and I just thought, well, how useless is that? And then I started thinking, well, there's a lot of people that respond to what Rothko did. And I started looking at it a little bit more. At the time that he started painting his color field paintings, so we're talking about the close of World War II, the United States comes into a realm of unprecedented economic prosperity. It's one, if not the only time in the history of the United States where a typical individual holding a typical job had enough resources to buy a house for their family and a car. You know, where that disparity of income was the smallest that it had ever been in the U.S. history. But on the other hand, you also have the Cold War going on, where soldiers are fighting and dying in areas of the world that nobody will ever know about, and little kids, were watching film reels at school and also between the cartoon and the main feature at a movie theater, where they would be reminded what to do to survive a potential nuclear blast. Can you imagine that realm or that feeling and atmosphere of constant stress? And Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock were both responding to this tension, this constant social tension in the air, by meditating about it. And in meditation, you can either relax into the mental noise or you can withdraw from it. Buddhist meditation is very much withdrawing from the mental noise. And there are some shamanic meditations that are very much about kind of diving into it, losing yourself into it. Sufi meditation takes part in both of those kind of extremes. And so you get Jackson Pollock that would meditate and explore these kinds of ideas by making marks where he would explore spatial references and color references without any sort of physical objects, but he would just kind of explore that frenetic energy. And then you get Mark Rothko at the extreme opposite end that would create an environment with very subtle changes that invites you to take a moment and step back. And you look at the paintings, they both worked at very similar size, both very large paintings designed for somebody to stand 5 feet away and completely lose track of their surroundings. And once you appreciate the kind of environment and world that they're both creating in, then you can start appreciating, well, maybe this is part of what's being communicated. Maybe I can look for that. Look at this as a meditation and maybe approach at it from that way. And whether or not you like it afterwards is completely immaterial, but at least you have a vocabulary, a framework to approach it from a perspective of respect. And I think that can help us a tremendous amount in appreciating art, whether or not we like it. And one thing that we'll return to over and over again is this idea of precise vocabulary. You know, how many emotions, and this is for anybody to answer, how many emotions do you feel now compared to emotions you imagine you may have felt as a baby? As babies really have only two states. One is satisfied and one is a state of need. And that's pretty much it. That's their emotional range. They're either satisfied and we see expressions of calmness and quiet, or they're in a state of need, and we see energy and noise. And that's pretty much it. Compared to that, how many emotions do you have now that you can actually talk about and express?
I would say that we're a lot more complicated now because we've grown, we've learned, and we've just noticed more things. So now we can understand fully what we're feeling.
Yeah, and I think that there is an awful lot to that. With that expansion of awareness, you also learned how to communicate what you were being aware of. And I think what's interesting to me, talking to counselors and therapists, when more words for expression are given to their patients that they serve, it's fascinating because then they're able to get a better handle on the emotions that they feel. Sometimes when we don't understand things, we have a tendency to react with anger or fear. And when we start understanding what the nuances are, that anger and fear have a tendency to dissipate and dissolve into what those more nuanced emotions are. And I'm using that as a metaphor, of course, but I hope you can see the parallel between that and using, as you're looking at art, using more precise words to talk about what you see. And just when somebody looks at your artwork and tells you that they love the visual rhythms you developed with the warm hues counterpointed by these sharp tones of other colors that really help balance everything out, that feels so much more satisfying than when you ask, how do you like this, to somebody and they say, oh, it's pretty. What does that give you? Pretty. What does that mean? Nothing. I think pretty is an evil word to an artist that wants to express themselves, because that really doesn't give us anything to go for. But if we can talk about our work and the work that we encounter with more precise language, even though we're still communicating that we think it's pretty, the other person walks away feeling a lot more filled. And, they feel more validated. And I love, can you guys all see that? All right, excellent. Now I want to move on. I'm going to do this kind of quickly because I want to spend the last half an hour or so talking about this next assignment that we're going to be doing. And I want to share with you just some of the houses. Kelly or Emily, do you have anything, any comments or observations you'd like to make before we move on to the next segment?
I think a part of our reading talked about whether or not, I think in the first chapter, whether or not that we needed context from the author, um, like for the whether or not artist. I think it was like the last quote of the first chapter about how getting a statement from the artist about what the art is about adds to, like whether or not it adds to appreciating it. And the last quote of the chapter was like someone arguing that it does, because even artists sometimes don't know what they're feeling when they make something, so them putting it to words kind of helps themselves understand it as well. um so in the discussion of whether intentions of the artists make the art or not, I think that can it can help to know them, but that even they don't necessarily know why they made it, but everyone can bring an interpretation to it, including the artist.
Well, I really like that. That's an excellent observation, Emily. Thank you. I like that because, in my perspective, when they do offer what you're talking about, when they do offer something about their intention, that becomes another element to the art. It may not be a part of the painting the same way that the paint is, but I think that helps us to appreciate what they're thinking, and also becomes part of the presentation of the overall thing, whatever the thing is. And yeah, I think it is ultimately valuable. So yeah, excellent, very good,
Yeah,
thank you.
I think in my like first chapter questions responded to that I think we were asked whether or not we agreed with that. And I mentioned this, there was a piece of art in the UVU student exhibit recently. That it was like the smallest piece that I saw, and it was just like a white background with a couple of dark circles. And it's like, I don't understand why this is here when everything else looks like they spent so much time on it. And this, it's just a very small piece of paper with some circles. And then the description was like the whole, made the whole difference because they talked about how they accidentally caught a solar eclipse on their camera roll, and that's what it was. So I think that's an example I thought of when we were talking about how in information changed how you looked at something.
Yeah, giving it context unfolded a whole new realm of understanding and gave it validity to you. Yeah, I like that. Very cool. Excellent. And I would be happy to argue that that artist statement that you read is every bit as much a part of that piece of art as the image itself, because I think that the two together really made it a worthwhile experience. I think that's a really good observation. Thank you. Okay, we only have a couple minutes, but I want everybody to go through. Have you guys all had a chance to look at this discussion that shows the different images of houses? All of you guys have, right? Okay, good. I just want to go through this really quick and show some of these. There's some really good shots, and I love what people have done. I think this is one of my favorite images. Just it's very, very interesting. And some of these I think are, I love it when people go really close and then far away. And it's fun to see different people's perspectives and how they different shots. And one of the things that I enjoy is when people put stuff in to make references to the relative size. Like here we see a huge tree in a tiny, tiny house. We see it on the porch, and then we have it right close up. I think some things like that are kind of fun to see when people do. And I love this kind of stuff where the house itself is inside of another house. I think that that's kind of, I love when you guys play with ideas of irony and expectation. I think that's really fun. And you know, when you put like different actors around the house as well. And things like this where it looks like it's almost in a natural setting are really a lot of fun to see as well. And I think that this one right here is one of my favorite shots as well, because you can barely tell what it is because of all of the light that's from the inside. Everything else is so shadowed. So it's fun to see what kinds of things people did. Now, in the rubric for the house, there are two elements. One is for the construction of the house, and the other one is for the 5 images that were taken. And if the house, if I say that the house needs a little bit more work or whatever like that, you do not need to redo all the photos that you've done. You can just work on the house a little bit and then resubmit the 5 photos that you've already taken with the photo of the updated house if you want to. And there's a couple people where I put a 0 in because I want them to look at it and answer some questions that I have, and then I'll go through it. And as soon as they answer me, then I'll change out the grade. So if you're one of those people that you got a 0 for something, double check, or you get fewer than perfect points, look at what I had to say and respond to me. There's been a couple times where I did not understand what was going on, because the images weren't really clear of what was going on. And so I didn't give a very good grade, and I asked for clarification. The person was able to tell me what was going on, and then the grade went up substantially just because I had the context. So I really, I wanted I want everybody to go through the discussion, look at everybody's houses, whether or not you have done all the three of the comments so far. I want you to look at the other houses and see what people are doing, because it's a lot of fun to see where people's heads go in the projects that they're creating. Now I am trying to get to, okay. We are going to spend the next half an hour. Before we get into this, were there any houses that were not your own that really struck you guys as fun to see?
Kelly, I really loved your house. Just like that dark, woodsy vibe. Yeah, I just loved it. It was really cute. And I liked all your little figurines with it.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. Because it's a lot more fun to talk about stuff as we're working on it together. And that's one of the things we miss when we do the online class. And so I hope people do engage with those discussions, and just it's really fun to hear things like Nicole just said. It's really fun to hear that something has impacted you or you really enjoyed something. And even if it's for credit or not, you can just tell the person, hey, I really loved when I saw this. I think that would be great. And at least we can get some sense of interconnection, interactivity with this. Now, this is the background for the defining volumetric form with line. This is module 2. And before we go on, I want people to be aware that each of the modules like this, there are 6 project modules, and each of them should take between 10 and 15 hours. And that's important because your grade on a project is almost always directly related to the time that you spend on it. Years ago, I was teaching foundation drawing at BYU. And one of the things I wanted people to do was just see what would happen when they spent 2 hours or more at one chunk on a drawing. And this one drawing assignment that I gave was very simple. You had to have an egg, a stick, and a banana, but you had to spend a total of 6 hours in at least 2-hour chunks. So you could do it all at one time or break it up, but it had to be in 2-hour chunks. And one of the students who got the lowest grade bragged to everybody, including me, that his drawing only took him 33 minutes. And since time was a big part of the grade, he didn't get that part of the grade. And he left me a poor review as a professor. But so sad. But keeping in mind that each of these projects, and we're talking about 10 to 15 hours, and that should include taking the quiz, doing the background research, writing your essay, as well as working on the project itself. Most of these projects, the actual physical work on the project itself, should be right around 10 hours, 10 to 12 hours. If you think you're all done and you've spent 3 hours on it, look again and just put in more time. Because you will find the more time you put in, it always gets better. And sometimes you have to redo stuff. I've worked on projects before where I spent 120 hours and realized I just spent 120 hours screwing things up. So I had to go back and start from the beginning again. Time does relate directly to grade for most of the things that we do in this class. So just keep that in mind. If you finish something and you don't get the grade that you want, it would be a good idea to go back, look at the parameters of the assignment, and then look at the time that you spent on it as well. Anyway, so this is the background. We're talking about defining volumetric form with line, and the assignment for this is basically a 3D scribble. And all of these artists use lines as an integral element of the art that they do, the three-dimensional work that they do. And some of you have already written the essays about this, and you pick some of these artists, done some really remarkable work. Each of these artists approached this medium from a different perspective. And that's why we give you this spread of different artists, so you can see different ways of approaching the medium. And then here's the 3 paragraphs. And when I look at the essays, I am looking at specifically basically 3 paragraphs, and then that you followed within each of the 3 paragraphs the prompt for that paragraph. And a paragraph needs to be 3 to 5 sentences is what a paragraph is. Now, I'm not expecting people to be award-winning writers or even professional writers. That's not what we're interested in. If you could make a living doing writing, you would be a writer. You wouldn't be an artist. Artists work with communicating outside of the perceived limitations of language. But we need to be able to be precise in our communication as well. And so even though I am looking for solid grammar, good spelling, sometimes people will turn in a first draft in part of their assignment. Sometimes I've asked people to rewrite a couple paragraphs, but for the most part, I think you guys are doing really pretty well in this. Now going, moving forward with the project itself, there are some things that we want to do, and you do see a lot of animal sketches. And what is upsetting to me is I'm going to have to go back through and see if I can find more of these images. Have the rest of you guys in your module, what's frustrating to me is that sometimes I will access the module and those images will show up, other times they won't. Have you guys been able to see the images in this module itself? Okay, so you guys do have the images coming through in the modules? Okay, all right, great. Then we'll only talk about the ones that are showing up here. If something does not come through, let me know. It could be an issue with the internet, which I can't help, but it could be an issue where I just need to re-upload the images. So let me know if there's a problem. But what we're essentially doing is creating a drawing as a contour sketch or a sketch of some sort. Then we're using the wire in our kits to kind of create that in a 3-dimensional space. And what that looks like is shown pretty well by those artists that are in the background section of this module. And I want you to be thinking about ideas of how can the wire make different line qualities. And sometimes people have used different wires as well in addition to the wire that you get in your kit, and that's totally fine. But one thing I need to be very clear about before you start working on this, please wear eye protection and wear gloves. That's very important. For a while, I was installing those big chandeliers with the blown glass stuff that you see, like at Bravenel Hall and things like that. And they are installed by wires that I cut, and then I tie through the glass, and then I tie the other end of the wire onto the 3D grid to suspend the whole chandelier. When I wasn't wearing gloves, I got poked deep all over my hands. And if I wasn't wearing eye protection, there were several times when the wires would flip up and hit my glasses. So make sure that you wear something. And you can get pretty cheap goggles or eye protection at Harbor Freight or Walmart. I think both of those, you can get them for maybe $2 or $3 at the most. And I would definitely wear garden gloves, something like that. And you can find at the Dollar Tree, you can find for $1.25 gardening gloves. So and use those, because otherwise your hands will get incredibly dirty and it just can be really gross. But as you work with this, is going to be some experimentation that you go through as you try to understand the medium. And feel free to supplement that wire that you get. You can find baling wire at IFA, Intermountain Farmer, or you can also find it at Harbor Freight. And at craft stores, you can find wire that you can use. And it's really fun to do stuff like this with that initial wire and then maybe a slightly different color, like start with black and use silver as well. But what you're doing is creating something that addresses the dimensions of space. It needs to be wide, it needs to be deep, and it needs to be tall. This one is about 2 feet long. It doesn't need to be that big. We are looking at something that is going to be probably about the size of a volleyball or a little bit smaller, because that's about all the wire that you have access to in the kit. But definitely do what you can to add to that with other elements of wire. Maybe not pipe cleaners, but you could definitely find other kinds of wire. And as we look at this fish image, this does look like it relates very directly to some sort of a scribbled sketch that somebody's made. But look at what they've done with the wire and changing using the wire to change the line quality. What are some of the things that you notice about this fish where the wire is doing its wire things that really helps to make this sculpture engaging? Do any of you see anything direct on this fish that you notice about the line quality? Yes, Andy.
I notice how the wire will wrap around one wire super tightly while the others are just super loose, while other wires are just loose, so that way you can kind of get a feel for what's going on.
Yes, definitely. Like right here, this is loose just so you get a feel of what's going on. Here it's wrapped around very loosely, and here it's wrapped around really tightly. And I think if you look up here at the teddy bear image in your module, that is another example of a person doing a really good job at what Andy was just talking about, where they wrap tightly, they wrap loosely, they did coils, they did different things like this to kind of give us a sense or a feeling of different textures going on with the wire. And notice how this fish, we can tell that it extends away from us, it extends side to side, and it's tall. This person did not do a flat drawing and stand it up, did they? They are engaging all three of those dimensions, height, width, and depth. One of the tendencies that some people have, and I know this is going to be a difficult project for the 2D artists sometimes going into it, because you're thinking 2D all the time. And I want you to kind of embrace that and engage that idea and see what you can do with it. Now, this person made the fish in 3 dimensions. And one thing that I've seen is people have made things like flowers or butterflies that were flat. And that really doesn't do it. That doesn't satisfy it. But what if you used your wire, you made the stem, and then you made the flower, and instead of doing like a daisy that's flat, you did like a mum or a black-eyed Susan that has a really big central cone and then petals going in all sorts of different directions. And maybe you made several of those. If the stem has a leaf or two on it, instead of leaving the leaf flat, give the leaf a little bit of form, bend it away and curve it away from the stem. And you can even make, if you're going to go the flower route, make several of them, make 4 or 5, and then put them together in a vase. People have used this to make the caged bird. It looks like a cage, a standard wire bird cage, but then they've done lots of decorations, and they made trapeze inside of the cage and then put a bird on it. And the floppy dog has a lot of loose coils, and then other things that kind of hold the coils together. But in those cases, the person is engaging the volume and the things inside of the volume instead of just doing a flat line drawing and then trying to stand it on end. Do you guys understand what the difference is with that? Okay, good. Excellent. And then just like the other assignments that you do, this is going to be something that you share in a discussion as well. And in the discussion, on this one, I don't think you have to write. I think you're just sharing. Yeah, in this discussion, you're just sharing your image. You get points just for sharing your image. You don't have to write about other students. If you want to engage and tell people, hey, I really like that, that's great, that's good. Now, in all of these assignments, the final grade that you get, I want you to be clear and understand completely that the final grade, the grade that I give you, is not your final grade, because you can always go back and rework something. Like if I tell you, hey, I only gave you 80% because you did all these things, but this still needs to be brought out to this, or you need to add this, or I would suggest you do these things to it, make those adjustments and resubmit it. And I have absolutely no problem giving you more points. If we were in class together, I could see what everybody's doing, and I could tell you as you're doing it, I would suggest doing this, or that's a little bit too flat. Why don't you add these elements to it? And then you would have the room to adjust. But since we're not in that, when I start seeing the images of you submitting, that's when I can respond to it and say, yeah, you've got it, or actually this needs to be tweaked a little bit on this way or that. Now, when I give you feedback to the assignment as to why you're not getting perfect points, am I being critical of your work? Am I telling you you're not a good artist? Yes.
I would say that you're not being like critical, but you're just giving us critiques to be able to help us do the best that we can.
Yeah, and thank you, Andy. And that's what my intent is. And it's not to tell you that the art is good or bad. It is to tell you specifically that this fits the parameters of the assignment. So you're learning what needs to be learned during that part of the process of the course. And so it's not at all telling you that your stuff sucks, or that you're. I actually had a critique where a teacher told me that at least my skin was healthy because I could donate it to burn victims and my work would be good for something. Pretty harsh critique. I won't be doing that. But if I do say something, hey, I like this, but it doesn't fit the assignment at all, don't take that I'm invalidating your work. Just realize that we need to bring it back to the parameters of the assignment. Whether or not you like the assignment is not important. What is important is that we get through the assignment together. Okay? That I remember having so many discussions going to school with other people. Oh, this assignment is stupid. That assignment is stupid. I can't believe the teacher's having us do that. Well, yeah, some assignments are stupid, but we need to do it so we learn what's on the other side of the assignment. So please don't be offended. Don't be hurt. Just and if you don't think it's valid, or if you don't understand what I'm saying, let me know, and I'm happy to clarify. My job is not to give you guys bad grades. My primary job is to help you to succeed in this class. And if everybody gets A's, it does not hurt my feelings at all. What that does mean is that you guys are interested enough to engage with the material and do everything. And that's how you get an A, essentially. All right. Do we have any more questions about that assignment? Does that seem pretty clear to people? Because as we work on it, like next week, yes, Nicole.
Sorry, just a quick question. I noticed in the assignment description there was mention of let's see, the like a wood panel and paper mache. Is this something that's going to be used for another project later on?
Okay, the wood panel, I should remove that because we're not working with wood panels. In your kit, you have a foam block that you're going to carve, and then you have a base of foam as well. And that, what you just pointed out, don't pay too much attention to that, but I do want you to keep this wire because when you do your final project, you're going to be combining, excuse me, you're going to be combining as many things as you can that you have already done in the class. And that'll be an opportunity for you to reuse your wire if you want to, and add that as elements of texture to that final thing. So the part that you're talking about, it says, it is important to use what you learned during your sturdy object study so your piece will hold up to the weight of paper mache after you mount it to the wood panel you made. That is not important because we didn't do a sturdy object study. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that out right now. So Nicole, excellent catch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. It is edited. So if you refresh your page, that should be gone now. But I do want you to save the wire, this wire piece, because towards the end of the term, on that final project that you do, you can use it as well. The paper mache, we did originally have people put it on their wire sculptures, but now we're having them put them on the foam carvings that they make. So we'll talk about that again in about a month and a half, somewhere around there. And that's when you'll actually do the paper mache. So excellent question. Any other questions about the assignment? Yes, Andy.
So for this wire project, I noticed that we had to like sketch out whatever animal or object that we wanted to do. And do we only have to do one animal or object, or do you want us to do like multiple sketches and then decide what we want to do from there?
I would say most of you artist types like to do multiple sketches until you, or go over the same one over and over again until you feel comfortable. I would say fiddle around until you feel, yeah, this is something I can do. It doesn't have to be an animal. It doesn't have to be an object. It could be either one or a mix of both. I would recommend that it's something that you are comfortable drawing. I've had people do Star Wars paraphernalia. I've had people, one guy did a wire sculpture of what he wore to church every Sunday. You know, so you could do lots of different things, whatever you'd like to do. But the important thing is to sketch it until you're comfortable with the idea that you can turn this into a wire drawing in 3 dimensions. Does that kind of answer your question?
Kind of does. And I do just want to clarify that so one of the artists' wire art was of the hands. Do you want us to try and do for those like 2D artists? Do you want us to try looking at something in 2D, but then try to create it into something 3D to where it can stand on its own?
I would try to stay away from doing things that are completely flat.
Okay, got it.
And a way to resolve that is if you're going to be doing something that's flat, make several different versions of it, and then stand it up and rotate the versions on a common axis. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that would help. Or even look at, you know, those wood puzzles where you press out the wood pieces and you can make a dinosaur or an insect or whatever. Look at that and imagine the edges of those wood pieces as being the wire.
Okay.
And sometimes that will help, you know, especially when you have so much experience as a 2D artist, sometimes that helps get things going in the right direction. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Emily, what's your question? Thank you for asking.
I was wondering, If you could tell us a certain kind of brand of wire to look for when we go to the store to get it, or what, even just what section to look for. I've never gone to Hobby Lobby for wire before, so I might need some help.
Okay. Look at the wire that comes in the kit is, I think it's about 16th of an inch, so I think it's probably close to 18 gauge, something like that. And it is a wire that is flexible and also holds its shape. Sometimes this can be a difficult project because the wire, you have the cutters and the pliers in your kit to help you to form the wire, because sometimes it can be difficult. But what you're looking for is a wire like a baling wire or something along those lines that will hold its own shape and weight as you bend it, and something that does not spring back to its original shape. Sometimes uh, it can be problematic. Uh, some hardware stores, they don't really understand what we're doing, and they may give you a wire that is designed for conduit use and electrical work that just is not going to do it. So we're looking for something that's like galvanized, something that is like for fencing, something like that. At Hobby Lobby, you go to the jewelry area and look for heavier gauge jewelry wire, like 16 gauge, something like that. 18 gauge is actually pretty small. We're probably looking more like 16, 14, or 12 gauge. The gauge refers to how many can fit into an inch diameter. And so 12, the higher the gauge, the tinier the wire is. Um, and so like when we start looking at 20, 24 gauge, that's what a needle would be. We don't want to do that. So we're looking for 12, 14, or 16 gauge. And you can find that copper wire like that at Hobby Lobby near the jewelry section. Or if you go to Intermountain Farmers, IFA, you can find wire like that. You ask them for something like fencing or baling wire, tell them what you're doing. And the people at IFA are used enough to students from this class going there that usually they know exactly how to help you. Same kind of thing if you go to Harbor Freight. You can get a pretty good sized coil of this for just a couple bucks. And I think that they sell silver or black. And same kind of thing. You tell them what you're using it for. You're bending it. It needs to hold its shape. Baling or fencing wire would work, but you're looking for that kind of gauge that's uh, probably around 12, 14, 16, right around there. And it would even help if you brought the wire from the kit with you, so you have something to kind of reference. Does that help,
And
Emily?
then, yeah, that's great. And then, do you know like how much of it we should plan to have on hand for it?
I think that everybody will get about 30 yards, something like that. And I would say um, a typical spool may have that amount or more. And I wouldn't spend more than a few dollars getting that. There's no reason to get like a huge spool.
Gotcha.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Kelly, do you have any questions?
No, I'm pretty set.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm hoping that you guys have a wonderful week and weekend. And again, I want to announce to everybody I'm going to be talking with two friends of mine about Bigfoot and folklore in Utah County on June 13th at the Provo Library. And it is absolutely free. It's at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we're going to have a panel discussion as well. So please, if you don't have any plans, come by. I doubt that there's going to be, there might possibly be refreshments, but it would just be nice if people actually showed up to this, other than my friends and me talking. That'd be so bad if we were in an empty room. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend. Next week, we're going to dive into the quiz a bit more and hopefully see some examples of what people are doing and talk about this a bit more. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
You.